Good morning. My name is Richard Ponte, and I'm the Director of Events and Programs for the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. On behalf of the entire team here, it is my pleasure to welcome you to Maine PFML Private Plans, What the Business Community Needs to Know, the latest in our webinar series. Thank you for joining. Before we get going, there are just a few things we'd like to share with you about today's session. All participants are in listen-only mode. Please submit questions using the Q&A function. Time permitting, we will answer them by the end of the session. We will also use the Q&A feature to share useful links and other materials. We have enabled closed captioning in English. You can access this feature by toggling it on the taskbar on the bottom of your screen. This meeting is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to you on our website in the next few days. And finally, if you lose your connection, please use the same Zoom link to reconnect. We would now like to begin by thanking our sponsors. Our premier sponsor is Cross Insurance. Our 2025 webinar series sponsors are AARP, Bangor Savings Bank, Kennebec Savings Bank, MEMIC, Merrill's Investigations and Security, Northeast Delta Dental, and Summit Natural Gas of Maine. I would now like to introduce Josh Morse to provide a few remarks on behalf of today's premier sponsor, Cross Insurance. Josh serves as the Director of Sales and Small Business for the state of Maine for Cross Insurance. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning, Richard. Thank you. We really want to thank the Chamber for taking a leadership position with regard to Maine paid family and medical leave. Cross has been through the implementation of paid family and medical leave in several states, and our leave management team stands ready to assist with implementation of policies, procedures, and to ensure compliance in the ever-changing world of leave management. As a family-owned Maine business, we certainly understand the challenges facing employers and their often limited HR teams. And we're very much looking forward to today's presentation with some great carriers. And thanks again to the Chamber. I'd like to pass the baton to Jake LaChance, Government Relations for the Chamber.
Good morning, all, and thank you, Richard, for those housekeeping notes, and thank you, Josh and Cross Insurance and our webinar series sponsors for their support in helping the Chamber bring the business community timely and pertinent information throughout the year. Before starting the program, I wanted to introduce our panel for today. First off is Gina Rutledge. She's located in Tampa, Florida, and Gina has over 25 years of experience in product development and management, including life insurance, individual disability, group disability, and most recently paid family medical leave for MetLife. In her current role with MetLife, Gina provides insights to influence new state and federal programs, considering paid leave laws, and partnering with various trade groups and state program stakeholders through rulemaking and operational process discussions. Next is Abigail O'Connell. She's a senior counsel at Sun Life US, advising Sun Life's group and voluntary business on legal issues related to absence management and statutory disability. She frequently speaks at industry conferences about legal and compliance issues related to absence management and testifies at bill hearings related to leave law, runs an industry working group on paid family and medical leave developments. Next is Umberto Speranza. Umberto is Unum's Vice President of Corporate Initiatives and overseeing high priority cross-functional initiatives that support the successful execution of Unum's enterprise strategy. Previously, Umberto served as AVP of Government Affairs, engaging with the lawmakers and public officials at the state and federal level by advancing and defending the company's legislative, regulatory, and public policy agendas. And last and certainly not least, we'll hear from Mr. Paul Boland. Paul began his career as a management trainee at Service Merchandise. During his 5 years in retail, Paul focused his career in the area of human resources and operations. Paul left the retail industry to focus on human resources leadership within the manufacturing industry, spending 9 years at Interface Fabrics Group, supporting the operations in Maine, Massachusetts, New York, and Michigan. And most recently, Paul spent the last 19 years at Northern Light Health in positions of increasing responsibility until his current position as Executive Vice President and Chief People and Administrative Officer. Now, today marks April 1st, and I will spare anyone any jokes surrounding this date because the significance for those in the Maine paid family and medical leave world is anything but a joke. Today marks the first day that wage reports and remittances are due to the Maine Department of Labor, and businesses have until the end of the month to do so without being penalized, which by rule is an additional 1% of your quarterly payroll. Subsequently, it is also the start of employers being able to opt into the private plan market if they choose as an alternative to the private or as an alternative to the state plan. Excuse me. This webinar will focus on Maine's PFML history and countdown to launch, what the law says about Maine paid family and medical leave plans, how carriers go about their private plan process, and what is important for the business community to know about private plans. So to dive right in here, Umberto, you are up first. Tell us a little bit about how we got here today.
Sure. Thank you, Jake. And thanks to the Chamber, Patrick, Jake, and team for the thoughtful engagement on PFML. It really makes all the difference for employers. And that's a lesson that we've learned. And Gina and Abby and I have done this across the country. The more engaged employers are, the more voices you have at the table, the better the outcome for all of us and for all of your employees. Wanted to quickly set the stage at the national level, very briefly talk about how we got here, how Maine came about, and then two of the industry's best, Gina and Abby, are going to dive into the details from a private plane carrier perspective and what employers need to know. But as you can see here, Maine actually is going to be the last state in New England to come on board when you account for the fact that Vermont and New Hampshire are actually voluntary. But the East Coast, the West Coast are nearly universally covered by statutory paid family medical leave now. It's been around for a long time, going all the way back to 20 years ago in California. But a trend that we, in the industry, of course, are happy with and we think provides a great outlet for employers is that states are increasingly recognizing the importance of private plans and the flexibility and choice that it gives employers. So really starting with New York, Massachusetts, most recently in Oregon, Colorado, and now, of course, the 4 states that are coming online in 2026, barring a potential delay in Maryland. The private plans are being embraced in very different ways, and that's part of the story you'll hear today. Every state does this a little bit differently, and Maine certainly has taken a unique approach to private plans. But the importance in the true public-private partnership is really going to go a long way to give Maine employers options as they seek to comply with this mandate. We can head to the next slide, Richard, and this will be my last, but we are going to talk just very briefly about Maine specifically. It seems like it's really snuck upon us, but it's been something that Maine has debated for years. And this, as you can see here, is the timeline of the national landscape and the horizon that we have to look forward to. Going back all the way before this timeline even, Maine was studying this issue through the PFML Commission, previous legislative debates. Of course, in that summer of 23, our bill was enacted here in Maine, and you can see how long it takes to go live. And I think we can probably all agree that it's never long enough when you're trying to get ready for something this monumental, and the staff as well, the DOL and the administration has their work cut out for them. But Maine is in good company with Maryland and Delaware, and as well as Minnesota in 2026 for now. Again, Maryland might be delaying. And we all know contributions have already begun. Jake mentioned the important date, which is today, 4/1/25. And we also know that on 5/1/26 benefits go live. But we can keep going, Richard, and just dive in a little bit more before we pass it over to Gina. And Maine has gone through a pretty quick regulatory process. The last year has been all about rulemaking. I think all of us on this call know the key points there when it comes to private plans, and Gina and Abby will dive a little deeper. But the private plan portal in Maine, a little bit different, given that it opened today. We've all been contributing as employers in this state already for a quarter. Other states did provide outlets for employers to avoid contributions entirely if they seek private plans, and that's something that I'm sure we'll get into later. But where we are today is really wanting to get the employer community and the business community in Maine, if interested, ready to do what they have to do to seek that exemption, seek a private plan, and do what's best for your employees. So I'll stop there, Jake. Maine PFML is got a lot to learn from the other states. We hope they all work together, and the industry is really at the service of the DOL and the PFML Bureau to make sure we kick this thing off on the right foot.
No, thank you, Umberto, for that introduction and kind of how we got here. Just want to remind folks too that please use the chat function as we go. I know Richard mentioned it at the beginning, but use the chat function for any questions, and we'll make sure that we get to those at the end. But now I'll turn it over to you, Gina, so we can kind of continue this conversation around the private plan market and what may or may not be best for somebody's individual business.
Thanks. I'd like to talk about how the new state law and regulations kind of work together and the employer obligation. So if we go to the next slide, think about the law as like the blacktop of a road, right? It gets you from point A to point B. But the regulations, they're more like the paint on the road and the signs on the road, right? And that helps everyone drive successfully to get from point A to point B. And then you got private plans. That's kind of like the side road that gets you to the same spot. It just may be a different avenue, a different blacktop road to get there. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the options. So the first thing the state wants to do is say, are you required? Oh, can we go to the next one? Let's see. There we go. Employer considerations and obligations. So the first thing is identifying, are you a person who needs to provide this benefit? And the state is looking at your tax ID number, how you registered with the state to be an employer, and how many workers you have in the state. So once you register, then the state's going to say, by tax ID number, you're pretty much automatically loaded into the state trust fund as your plan administrator. But you do have that ability to opt out for that private plan. And the private plan can be insured or self-funded. All right, there are additional rules for self-funded. I'm sure we'll get to those, but just recognize by tax ID number, you need to make sure that you're registered with the state's authority to be able to recognize that is the same registration where you're going to be submitting your quarterly wage and hour work reports, and then also submitting the first quarter payroll contributions and employer contributions, is what you just heard about. All right. The second thing is you need to identify your workers impacted by the Maine Paid Family and Medical Leave program. And it's bigger than what you may have for other employer benefits. So not just your full-time workers, but it could also be your part-time workers and even some seasonal or temporary. When we think about these paid family and medical leave programs, look at it as like, remember unemployment, remember workers' comp. Paid leave is just as important, and that's as big of an employee benefit that is going to be there for your workers. So it's definitely based on everyone working in the state and how they get there. All right. Number 3, you have to comply with the funding requirements. So the state definition of wages includes overtime pay. It includes bonuses and commissions and different forms of money. So it's definitely bigger than what we look at in a short-term disability policy, which could be just your base wage. So really recognize that. And the state, when they put that payroll deduction contribution in, that could be 50% of the state's 1%, it's looking at pulling from that whole big base wage, plus overtime, plus commission. So whatever your employees earned, that wage, that deduction can be taken, and everybody pays into that first quarter. Now, the good news is, right, the state recognizes that if you have less than 15 Maine workers, that your payroll could be small, your income may be small. So there are some savings where you're just going to be needing to submit your employee payroll deductions instead of having to also contribute the employer portion of the contribution, right? Because what the state's doing, they're taking this money and they're putting it into a trust to be able to pay benefits out next year, right? So they're building up that trust fund to pay benefits. All right. The fourth thing you need to do is notify your workers. So the state has poster notices that are on their website that you can pull down, and it's in different languages. So if you do have different languages within your work site, you can just pull down that notice and put it there. Also, payroll stuffers are nice because if there's going to be that payroll deduction, recognizing that the employees are going to get a benefit for that money that's being taken out of their paycheck, that's really important. It's a balance. And then also you need to put it in your new hire notices because again, you're setting up that payroll deduction. So it's nice for employees to know that that money is going to be used for a good reason and that the employee will have access to those benefits. The fifth thing is pretty unique to a paid family and medical leave program, and that is participation in the claims. And this is regardless whether you do a private plan or whether you go with the state trust as your claim administrator, right? There's information that needs to be flowing during a claim. We may need to verify employment. Is that person still working for you? If so, what are the hours that they're working? You know, if they're not scheduled to work on a Monday, they can't take a paid leave of absence for that Monday. And then we may need to ask about those total wages because did they work overtime? Did they get a bonus paid, right? We want to make sure that we're understanding what is their average weekly wage so that the benefit can be calculated correctly. And then coordination with other employer benefits, because the state's program is only going to be looking at the claim application for a paid family or a paid medical leave. They're really not going to be interested in other benefits that you provide as an employer, or like moving to number 6, how to coordinate with state and other federal employment laws that could be paid or unpaid, like the federal FMLA program, the Family and Medical Leave Act, your state family medical leave, ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. That's something that's fairly new that really helps support a worker through prenatal. It could be even fertility treatments. So how does leave kind of coordinate with that? And then, of course, workers' compensation and unemployment. All right. So it's really important for you as an employer to recognize all these different things that could come together. Plus, number 7, job protections kick in much sooner in these state programs. So Maine's program does say that the employee needs to return to the same or a similar position. They can keep their benefits. So keeping health insurance, or any contributions that they may be, putting together for retirement income, things like that. Really important. All right. And then the last thing, just real quickly, is reporting. So the quarterly reporting that you're doing right now to support the workers and the wages paid in for your Maine workers, that quarterly report is going to continue. So even if you get a private plan exemption, that report for wages is still going to be required to be sent in every quarter. So if you want to know more about that information, there are resources on your state's website. I've got a link here. You will be getting a copy of this deck. But, the state's doing a really good job of trying to get this information together and updating frequently asked questions, providing those posters and those different notices. So we appreciate your time. I'm now going to pass you over to Abby to talk about the private plans and if it's right for you.
Okay, if you could just flip to the next slide. So I think this, okay, here we go. So I'm Abby O'Connell. I'm work for Sun Life. I'm actually missing the meeting right now where our HR team is filing their own private plan. And we have built a decision matrix for ourselves as an employer who employs people all over the United States. And I wanted to include some of the considerations that we make as an employer about whether or not to enter a private plan in a state. So I think the most tangible concern for business is cost. And I will say that what was difficult about Maine is that we are all required to contribute for this first quarter of 2025. But if you gain an exemption, then you're exempt from future refunding. So what you want to look at with costs is not only the savings that you can save from the pre-funding period, but also what your rate may be if you're going with a fully insured plan compared to the state rate. So the state of Maine has a rate of 1% of payroll, and it's split evenly between employers and employees, unless you're an employer who has less than 15 lives, in which case you only remit the employee portion of that premium. And premiums are assessed on wages up to the Social Security wage cap. So it's relatively easy to work with your insurance broker to get a quote, right? And figure out what your risk is. You know, if you get a quote and it's way over 1%, then you're that's a consideration for you, right? And then you're weighing around like, how much am I going to save by not further contributing in the pre-funding period? Or you may get a rate that's competitive with the state rate, in which case you're going to be much better off financially with a private plan. There is a cost to apply for your private plan in the state of Maine, and that is interesting because that varies state to state. It's $250 to apply, and then an additional $250 if you're approved. So that's, something you have to just be prepared for if you're going to apply. One of our big considerations at Sun Life, because we already have a pretty generous company paid family and medical leave program for our employees, is our volume of employees in a state, and then whether we have private plans in nearby states. So for example, we have a lot of employees in Massachusetts. We have a private plan in Massachusetts. And so an employee only has to file one claim to get their federal FMLA evaluated and their Mass PFML benefits evaluated and their short-term disability benefits. And so with a private plan, your employees are going to potentially be making one call to file for all of their leave entitlements and potentially disability benefits, rather than filing with your insurance carrier for short-term disability, filing a certification potentially to human resources for their leave if you're managing leave in-house, and then filing a third application to the state of Maine for Maine PFML benefits. So you want to look at employee experience and whether or not the employee is going to have to put forth multiple applications. And then you also want to evaluate the employee experience comparatively to nearby states, especially in New England, where we have so much PFML. And this has happened, if you have like 2 employees in Maine and 50 in Mass, and they're having vastly different experiences, that can breed discontent. So you want to consider that. Employer considerations, Gina addressed the fact that you have to be actively engaged with providing information, whether or not you have a private plan or a state plan. But if you have a private plan, you may have a more holistic view of your employee's absence, because you're going to readily be able to see like what dates were approved, what amounts were approved. You'll have an anticipated return to work date, and you're going to be able to make a phone call really easily. And Maine may also have great customer service, so it'll foresee what their accessibility is. But if you work with a trusted short-term disability partner, you already know that how you can get access to information. So you may consider that. And then a major consideration for us is overlap with existing company leave. So we already provide our employees leave to bond and care for a family member for their own medical condition. And so for us, establishing a private plan in Maine was sort of expected, because now we know that we can integrate the Maine benefits within our own company leave program pretty seamlessly. And it just allows for like a holistic, like us to have a more holistic view of the total leave entitlement for our employees. So we put this together just so you might sort of start to do your own analysis. I will say that Sun Life has a couple hundred employees in Maine, and it's going to be a major cost savings for us to establish a private plan. And so it's definitely like there's no cost to get a quote, whether it be fully insured or self-insured. So it's I think cost is a good place to start by getting a quote, and then you'll be able to sort of make a decision about what's financially realistic for your organization. And I will say that we put an appendix, if you flip 2 slides forward, for those of you who don't know the Maine details by heart yet, we put you're not living and breathing them, building your policies and claim systems. We put this just very high level overview of what this program is. And so since we have a little time, I'll touch on some points. It's going to provide up to 12 weeks of leave. There's a 7-day waiting period for medical leave. The leave is going to be available for the employee's own health condition, right, which is a much lower standard than disability, to care for a family member with a serious health condition, to bond with either a newborn or newly placed child, for purposes of safe leave, if the employee is like a victim of domestic violence, qualifying exigency, if the employee needs to step away from work because their family member has been called to active duty, military caregiver, and organ donation. The definition of family member is much broader than that of the federal FMLA. So that is an interesting nuance. Federal FMLA is parent, spouse, child. Maine's paid family medical leave includes domestic partner, a child of any age, sibling, grandparent, grandchild, or significant person in the employee's life, or with whom they have a personal bond like family. The eligibility is very low standard. Employees need only have earned 6 times the state average weekly wage during their base period, which is a 4-quarter period. The benefit is a very high income replacement, so employees can be paid up to 90%, and the maximum is equivalent to 100% of the state average weekly wage. So we leave this in here just for reference, and I will say there's a lot of great resources. Gina's slide had a link to the Maine Department of Labor resources. I'm sure Unum, Met, and Sun Life have dedicated resources on the, so if you just Google Maine PFML Met Life, you'll see their page, my page. So there's a lot out there about the program itself. But at this point, I think we're going to wrap up our content and turn to Q&A if anyone has any questions. I see one in the chat.
Yeah, before we actually go to the Q&A, I actually want to tap Paul Bolin in, Executive Vice President for Northern Light. Paul, after kind of hearing this presentation and what you folks are going through at Northern Light, as an employer that on the practical level is considering a private plan, what are some of the things that you're thinking about?
So I think Abby outlined it nicely in her comments just a few minutes ago, but our focus really is certainly there has to be something that's affordable. Like a lot of employers, we had already offered a short-term disability plan that had pretty robust parental leave provisions as well, et cetera. And so how does that dovetail with the new paid family leave law? All of those are considerations with whether you go private or stick with the public plan. But one of the things that we wanted to focus on, in our assessment is, what do we anticipate the cost being? If we go with a private plan, is it fully insured? Is it self-insured? And all those are individual decisions that business is based upon their size and claims experience would determine what's best for them. But the key, I think, is that everyone is figuring this out. Other states have done it, but no one has done it quite like Maine is doing it in terms of the quarter, the first quarter up front where everyone's paying. And I think we've certainly talked about that in other forums with the chamber. But the focus, I think, really is, in addition to the cost of the plan, what's the service that employees can expect when they do need to use their leave entitlement to receive benefits. And we felt, based upon our experience, that our employees would be better served, at least in our situation, in a private plan. We think that would likely have a better experience than what the state would likely offer, and not knowing what the budget challenges the state might encounter in the future and how that service level might change. So we thought we'd have more control over maintaining a consistent positive experience for employees who need to navigate leave. So that was part of the calculation that we used in our assessment to move forward with the private plan.
Yeah, I appreciate those sentiments, Paul. And obviously, like has been outlined, every business and employer is going to be different, obviously, within the makeup of what you're looking at as an employer. Obviously, in this example with Northern Light, while some things are remaining consistent for the business community, obviously, Northern Light is in different positions than a lot of other employers. They have geographic considerations, high employee count. All of those things are going to factor into
Yeah.
those decisions that are being made. So while Paul obviously gave great insight for what Northern Light is dealing with, I can't I can't emphasize enough that when going through this process for your individual business, it really is going to be tailored to what individual experience you want. As Paul brought up, the delineation between whether or not you want to be tied to the state or not are obviously part of that consideration, as well as cost point and ease of use. So as we kind of go through things, and I appreciate both Gina and Abby's insight into this. Obviously, it's going to be extraordinarily employer dependent on the decisions that you end up making. I will also mention too, and I know was brought up earlier, when applying for these private plans, whether you do it in this quarter, which is considered the second quarter, or going forward, it's important to remind employers that make sure that application happens within the first 2 months of that quarter, because that is going to relieve you of having to do remittance for that quarter in which you apply. So the example being, if you apply in April, May of this quarter, you're not going to be responsible for the second quarter remittance into the state plan if you choose to go private. But if you do so in that last quarter, in that last month of the quarter, excuse me, so this example being June, you are going to be subject to the remittance for this quarter. And that goes for any of the quarters that you end up going forward for applying for these private plans. Before turning over to the question and answers here, I do want to say that on the Department of Labor's website, there are currently 18 certified programs for private plans that have been approved, pre-approved by the DOL and the Bureau of Insurance. And I encourage everybody to go on to the Department of Labor website to check out the resources that they have there. And in going forward, if we're not able to answer any of these questions in the chat, the chamber is happy to be a conduit for asking questions, whether it be to the Department of Labor or the Bureau of Insurance when it comes to any of these things. In looking at the question and answer for you folks, we'll start with a question from Megan. For intermittent leave, how does that work with the waiting period? I.e., for medical for 1 day a week, do they go for 5 weeks while missing 1 day before it kicks in to satisfy the waiting period?
So I can take that. No, it's really based on like a calendar week. So if they have 1 or 2 absences, like the very first week, that would satisfy that waiting week, and the very next week would be like the full benefit, right? So that is really kind of unique with a paid family and medical leave program that's different from short-term disability. Because if you think about short-term disability, they're gone from work the entire week. Right now, short-term disability can be for physical therapy or mental therapy appointments. So those intermittent leaves are really what sets it apart from that disability preventing you from working at all.
Gina, I agree with you. If you're taking one Monday off for medical leave, then the following week you'd be entitled to be paid benefits. The one thing that I would note is that the statute allows the employer and employee to, I guess, agree to increments of less than 1 workday, but not less than 1 hour. And I'm going to put a key sentence from the statute as an answer into this thing, just so people have it. But it's something that you might consider is going for a 1 hour increment, particularly if you are also subject to the federal FMLA, so that you can decrement time concurrently between both programs.
So that physical therapy appointment, right? In other words, they don't have to take off the whole day to go to that 1 hour physical therapy. If you set up your plan where they're able to take off the afternoon or come into work a little bit late so they could do that physical therapy, you can still count that towards the Maine paid medical leave benefit, and you can count it towards FMLA, but you're not missing that associate for the entire day. So it's a really great
Another
point.
thing, another thing that I'll just add in there too is with the way the Maine law and rules are spelled out, there's no, like other states, there's no differentiation between medical leave or family leave when it comes to the statute. It's all kind of grouped together, and there isn't any differentiation within statute between those. So your 12-week chunk is your 12-week chunk. Other states have done it different ways where they actually separate medical leave from family leave or even maternal leave or paternal leave or what have you. But in Maine, that's not the case. So it's all that 12 weeks is your 12 weeks for all of the stipulations that the law and rule cover. Moving on here, a question from Michael. If we're applying for the private exception, do we have to wait for approval from the state before we stop paying the PFML deduction, or can we stop immediately?
Gina, I'll answer, and then I'm hoping you agree, but my advice would be to keep taking the deductions and hold the money and not stop immediately, because I'd wait till you're approved.
So I would say the same thing, or the exact same thing, because if not, the state is still expecting all that money, right? So if you don't take payroll deductions, then you as the employer may have to pay that money on behalf of your employees. So as a safe bet, right, continue to take it until you get that firm approval in your hand. By tax ID number, please remember, if you've got 2 locations and your tax accountant had said, you know what, it's easier for us to set up 2 different tax ID numbers to support each location. Please know you've got to file that private plan for both tax ID numbers. That's one of the things that we hear most often is that people forget that because it's one company, but you got to pay attention to how you choose to do business in the state with your registry, with your name. And then when you take those payroll deductions or stop, if somebody leaves, right, and you've taken payroll deductions that you haven't yet paid to the state, you may want to find out how to get that money back to that person, because once your approval has been received, you will need to return that money back to the employees. So that's another tip, is just recognize if you do have somebody that's leaving and you're holding that money after your private plan has been submitted, think about returning that money to that person, or you may have to, go find them once your approval is there to give them back their payroll deducted amount that was taken because of the tax exemption.
Awesome. Thank you both. Next question is, if an employer is having an employee pay a portion of the private plan, so 0.5%, does that continue to be a payroll tax deduction, or does it become a premium deduction?
They keep it in their same spot, right? So however it's showing up on their W-2, they keep it in the exact same spot, because that's why they're taking it, is because it is supporting the same paid family and medical leave benefit.
Next question is, can anyone explain the bonding required for a self-funded plan and kind of the process that goes along with that?
Sure. So, and I'll put in the answer a link to the Department of Labor's employer guide to self-insured plans. But if you're going the self-insured route, you need to get a surety bond that is essentially, it's guaranteeing that you're going to be able to make your claim obligations, and it's equal to 1 year's worth of premium contributions that the employer would have remitted in the state fund. based on the employer's contribution rate, and total wages for the 4 most recent quarters. So, and I'll put the link in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. I can quickly answer this next one from Chris. What is the $250 application fee and the $250 approval fee? That is going to the state of Maine through the Department of Labor. And the question being, if we decide to opt out, the state gets $500 from us anyways. The short answer to that is yes. You are going to be paying that $500 to the state for your private plan application fee and the private plan approval fee. Next question. What does the language say with respect to part-time employees and/or low-income employees, such as those that did not earn the state's average weekly wage at your organization? It is my understanding we should be taking out deductions for all employees, independent of earnings or tenure at my organization. Is that correct?
Yes.
I might be able to. I might be able to take this one first, and then Gina and Abby, correct me if I'm wrong here. But what really matters, I believe, at the end of the day, is what employees are actually eligible for the program, and you're only going to be remitting things from folks that are eligible for the program. So if they're not eligible for the program and they're not able to receive benefits based on the threshold that is given, then they're not eligible for the entirety of the program, full stop. So that is the considerations that you should be either talking to your HR people, payroll folks, who is hitting that threshold. Because if they're not eligible for the program, they're not eligible for the program. Is there anything that you want to add to that, Abby or Gina?
So there's two different things. There's the payroll deductions that will help support that benefit. And then there's actually when that employee can take the benefit, apply for benefits. So when you talk about earned at least 6 times the state's average weekly wage during the base period, you're looking back a whole year. So did they earn that base amount through the base year? And that's around $6,800 if we use today's average. So if you look back a whole year, did they earn $6,800 from every single Maine employer, right? Not just from you, but from every single Maine employer. So that's a pretty small amount. So that's why the state is really looking for those quarterly reports, because they are taking every single employer, all of their people working in Maine, putting it together. And then when that Maine employee applies for benefits, if they're applying through the state trust, the state's going to have all of those employer information together under the social security number, so that employee is there. So they may not be earning that much with you as a part-time worker, but they may have a second part-time job, or they may have a full-time job and the part-time job. You don't know. So I always err on the side of everyone's going to be eligible at one point, because again,
Yeah.
$6,800 is a pretty small amount to earn over the past year.
Thank you for that, Gina. Next question from Mary. Do you need to pay the employee portion back that was paid to the state if you are approved for a private plan?
So Gina, my understanding is that for Q1, no, all that money stays in the state and it doesn't come back. If you get approved now with the application just opening, and then if you have a fully insured plan, you must pay your employee back. If you have a self-insured plan, even if your self-insured plan does not start till May 1st, 2026, you can be deducting from employees not more than they would pay in the state plan and keep those deductions. And that is from a FAQ on the Department of Labor's website, that they're saying you can keep the deduction for a self-insured plan, but for fully insured, you'd be giving it back.
Correct. Think about it, right? Right now, the reason the state is collecting those contributions is they're building up the trust fund. So a self-funded plan means that the employer is doing the same thing. They have to have a separate account that they would be putting that money into. And the only reason to use that money would be to pay out benefits May of 26. So if you have a self-funded plan, that is another thing that you're going to have to do is make sure that you set up that separate account and put that money in there. The easiest thing to do is buy insurance, because then you know that the premiums won't start until your benefits are payable May 1st of 26 or after, right? So then you know that you would just be able to give the contributions back for April 1 forward, right? Depending on when you get your tax exemption. It will have an effective date. So pay attention to the effective date. And then any contributions that you have accepted, any payroll deductions taken after that private plan exemption date for fully insured needs to be refunded back to your employees.
Rolling right along here to make sure we cover all the questions that haven't been attended to. We have a private policy, but that policy may change to cover 2 years. Should we wait to apply for the exception until we know whether our policy is changing or not?
Yes, this is going to be an ongoing law, right? So just remember that once you get your company's plan in order and you apply for the private plan, the state's going to give you an exemption date. And right now it's going to align to the quarter. So you could have a July 1 approval date or effective date. You may have an October 1 effective date. So the longer that you wait, it just means that you're going to continue to pay into the state's program each quarter. So if you want your second quarter tax exemption, you really need to apply for the private plan probably by the end of April, early May.
Next question from Chris, I'll just answer quickly. Will the state do investigations on employees who abuse this? I will say that obviously that is the hope. We are constantly in conversations with the DOL about what the enforcement mechanism when it comes to fraud is. And our claim and posture has always been we want to make sure that to the best of our and the DOL's ability that the employee absences consequences are as hopefully as little as possible, right? So when it comes to using this program in a potentially fraudulent way, we're hoping that the DOL takes that seriously in both for ensuring one, the solvency of the fund and making sure that benefits are going to be being paid out when they're supposed to be being paid out and not more than that. But two, also again from that employee absence piece from an employer perspective, because that's what's going to be hitting them the hardest when it comes to kind of practical implications. So Chris, the answer there is we certainly hope so. Next question. Our company requires employees to have any accrued PTO applied to run concurrently with unpaid leave, such as FML or during the elimination period for short-term disability. Is this practice allowed for Maine paid family and medical leave?
So this is a really interesting question because in January, I think it was January, the Federal Department of Labor put out information on this, and what their take was is that although you can force PTO with an unpaid FMLA, if there is a PFML benefit running, that is akin to like workers' comp or short-term disability, wherein the employer and employee have to mutually agree to top up the PFML benefit with PTO, unless the state has a rule contrary to that. So that's very convoluted, but my understanding is that there has to be a mutual agreement between the employee and employer for PTO to run concurrently. And I don't, Gina, I don't know the.
You cannot require, right, right.
Yeah.
You cannot require, you can add. There are some advantages to allowing the PTO to run at the same time. During the unpaid waiting week for Maine paid medical leave, right? Using
Yeah.
PTO is widely accepted, right? And it's a good use, right? But requiring it when they also get this other benefit is not available or acceptable.
I'll
Moving
put
on here,
the
another.
link to the
Oh,
DOL
go ahead,
opinion
sorry.
letter in the chat.
Yeah.
Moving on here, currently you just have two more questions left, hopefully round out here by the top of the hour. Businesses are worried about 2026 when employees could start using these benefits and is wide open to the program and what it covers. We are already short-staffed. People who abuse this could put businesses in jeopardy. Is this why we are asking if the state will police? This is why we are asking if the state will police this. Yeah, absolutely, Chris. For sure, that's something that a lot of conversations have been centered around since the legislation was passed back in May of 2023. And we also have, we'll be seeing many pieces of legislation at the Maine legislature that are a very wide scope, anything from repealing the whole program to adding benefits and stipulations to make the plan even more expansive, and anything and everything in between. So the chamber specifically has some pieces of legislation in that will hopefully clarify and tighten up some of the holes that we see. And because again, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that this is operable for the Maine business community. So that's something that we've been involved in from the get-go and continue to be for this upcoming session in terms of legislative changes we feel as though need to be made.
And let's share,
Yeah.
some
I was gonna
experience
say-
that, go ahead.
Well, we're probably going the same direction, Gina, but Sun Life manages paid family medical leave for hundreds of thousands of employees. The fraud that I see that is the way bigger segment of fraud is identity theft, where somebody is filing a claim because they found the employee's name and they found the link to the employer and they're submitting the claim. So I'm reliant on my employers to say, hey, Abigail O'Connell's at work. What is this? When they see it come across. And so I would say my experience with fraud is much more that it's not the employee, it's an identity theft situation. I would say I could count on one hand the amount of times where we've had a piece of fraud come in where we've had the employer say she took the day off and we see she posted on Facebook she ran a 15K, and that, or like ran a road race or whatever. And that, like, on one hand, I can count how many times I've seen that with hundreds of thousands of employees. But Gina, what are your thoughts? Because you see a high volume too. Yeah.
Right, exactly the same thing. Where you got to think it's a process, right? And even this caring for a person who's like a family member, right? That we get a lot of anxiety about that. But think about it. The employee is taking off work, right? They're taking this person to the doctor. The doctor is signing medical certification saying that their patient is being cared for by your employee. And that information is coming in and there's all sorts of fraud statements. They know that this information is being monitored by the state as well as our own internal investigations, different things. So it takes a lot of guts to defraud by going and having all that paperwork certified, all the signatures coming back saying, this is the time I want to take off. All right. So we really don't see it. It is not something that somebody's going to invest all this time. Now, the people in your workforce that don't like to go to work. You already are aware of those people. So yes, we get claims that are filed as a last ditch effort because maybe they want to, have that job protection kick in. But that's another reason to participate in the claims, because when we get these things coming in, you're supposed to get at least 30 days advance notice if that leave is foreseeable, or right away, as soon as practicable, if the leave is not foreseeable. But having that communication, reaching out to us, letting us know, or letting the state know that this person may not be in good standing is important, because you do get that ability at the very beginning, before benefits are even paid, to weigh in on that employee and their request to take leave, right? And there is a hardship measure in your state law. So if it is a hardship, read those instructions. And the state's going to come out with more clarity and more examples, right, as we get closer to benefit payments on what that hardship would be. Because they do want you as a small business to succeed.
So one thing that I'll add there too, Gina, is especially a couple things. One, the chamber is involved with making sure that legislation coming up here in this session addresses undue hardship and make sure that it is actually operable for businesses to actually use, and not just something on paper that the rules and everything else have kind of muddied. So that's one of the practical areas that the chamber is looking to address this session. The other thing that I want to make folks aware of, and this could very well be different from folks that are going to be using a private plan or the state plan, but the rule currently says that an application for leave can be filed up to 90 days after leave starts. And I know just from hearing from employers, this is something that has kind of given them heartburn and heartache about, well, if someone has 90 days to put in an application for leave, can they just not show up in the meantime and just claim that leave retroactively when that application doesn't need to be in for up to 90 days total? That's also another one of the practical changes that we're looking into by saying, hey, listen, again, employee absences are one of the biggest worries that we hear from the employer community. And at the end of the day, time is not something that you're going to be able to get back from an employee, right? So even if it is a emergency situation or something that's not foreseeable, and that reasonable amount of time is not able to be taken care of, it's kind of that two-pronged situation where we're trying to figure out what is appropriate for an employer to engage in terms of that time frame, and then being able to claim that undue hardship and it actually have some teeth for the sense of, okay, this is something that's going to massively impact my business operations. It may be a specialty position that employee holds, certain certification. You may have to take the time to train somebody for those certifications while they're gone. All of these kind of practical grassroots situations that employers are going to face when employees are starting to take leave. Those are the types of things that we're going to be attempting to address in the legislation this session before benefits start in May of 2026. So I wanted to kind of touch on that aspect of things as well. Last question that I see in the chat here before we log off. I know it is the top of the hour, but work for a large corporate. You will see it every day. Doctors advocating out of spite if they disagree with who they are. We saw this at BNA. Yeah, it's obviously something that there's going to be hiccups along the way, right? With how this is a massive undertaking of a program, and the DOL has gone through various iterations of how we see fit, and legislatively with what we see at the state house, it's going to be one of those things like workers' comp, like minimum wage, like all these big kind of hard hitting labor issues. Paid family leave is going to be one of those things for the foreseeable future, and just going forward here in the state of Maine in terms of what we see for changes in legislation. So with that, kind of last call here for any questions. I do want to thank Gina, Abby, Paul, and Umberto, all for being a part of this. The slides will be available to folks here coming up. Richard will send that out to all the attendees. And again, the chamber is happy to be any conduit for information sharing, whether it's to the department, to the Bureau of Insurance, or to any of these experts here on the panels. We're happy to make those connections at any time. Again, thank you to our webinar series sponsors. Big thanks to Josh and Cross Insurance for us being able to put this on a pretty tight turnaround. So thank you all. Hope you have a good rest of the week and a good weekend coming up. Hopefully spring is right around the corner for you folks that are here in Maine.
Thank you.
Thank you.